Good morning, and thank you for enjoying it with the Six Pack, the Scotty Six Pack, the only podcast talking all things Wisconsin sports at just 6 days a week. I'm your host, Kedrick Stumbers. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumbers and follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. As I said, my name is Kedrick Stumbers. I cover the Wisconsin Badgers for Athlon Sports, and what I was doing for Athlon Sports and the Scotty Six Pack yesterday, Monday, October 7th, was covering Wisconsin Badgers basketball media day for the men's basketball program. And I got three big takeaways coming out from that. As you know, I've been doing a lot of hoops coverage this past week, talking with Greg Gard and some folks on the team down in Rosemont, Illinois at Big Ten media days. Now talking to the local media days, watching some open practice yesterday, last Friday. And I got three big takeaways for this roster. And as a special treat for our premium subscribers, at the end of the episode, we have a really exciting interview with New Zealand national team all-time leading scorer, the 12th leading scorer in FIBA World Cup history. Yes, it is my exclusive interview alongside Dylan Graff of Kirk Penny. Kirk Penny, the assistant coach for the Wisconsin basketball program, colloquially dubbed as Wisconsin basketball's offensive coordinator. Some really, really, really good tidbits there about recruiting, program building, changes in the offense. Stick around for that. If you are not a premium subscriber, you can catch our premium subscription show through Substack, scotty6pack.substack.com. That's just $5 a month. Gets you all of our premium interview content, as well as my full notebook from open practices. And maybe sometimes a little bit more than that. A little bit more than that in the subscribers only chat. You can get that through here or by listening on Spotify and linking your subscription exclusively through Spotify and Substack. But of course, this show to its core is always free. And we're going to start with my first big takeaway from Wisconsin Badgers basketball media day before we get to our interview at the end of the show with Kirk Penny. My first takeaway is I think I got more questions about the front court than answers so far. I definitely think I have some answers over the last couple of days. What I keep finding myself surprised by, however, is that despite the fact that there are more new faces in the backcourt for the Wisconsin Badgers, you lose Chucky Hepburn, obviously. You lose Connor Essegian. And so between the wing position and the backcourt, you bring in Cam Hunter and you bring in John Tonje on the wing. You also lose AJ Storr on the wing. Although there are more new faces at the guard positions. Obviously, we haven't even talked about Daniel Freitag, the true freshman who I think is going to be part of this rotation. Even though there are more new faces back there, I think I have more questions about the front court, where I at least first thought that the only real new face that was going to get significant minutes was going to be Northern Illinois transfer Xavier Amos, who's going to come in and eat up some minutes at the 4 with the departure of Tyler Wall. Of course, the argument being I should have fewer questions about the front court because this program is only replacing one player in the front court. Well, they're kind of replacing two. Because the Badgers are seemingly hell-bent on playing Nolan Winter at the 4. That's his more natural position in the front court than backing up Steven Crowell and playing the 5. But Xavier Amos is a 4. However, we have heard for the last couple of months that Greg Gard has been really impressed with Xavier Amos' ability to play a little bit smaller, to play at the 3 at times. I'm not entirely convinced. I think he's maybe a little bit too lanky for that. I think maybe he doesn't quite have the appropriate body type to do that on the wing. But we'll see. I'm not unconvinced. And that brings more questions about who's going to back up Steven Crowell. If it's not going to be Nolan Winter, primarily, who's it going to be? Greg Gard was asked this yesterday in his presser at Local Media Day, and Nolan Winter providing some backup minutes to Steven Crowell at the 5 did come up. But he spent a lot of time talking about Italian center Ricardo Greppi, a man who on this podcast, right after he committed, I looked at the tape, kind of evaluated him, and said, I think he is a good redshirt candidate for this team, despite knowing how thin they might be in the front court. I don't know anymore. I don't know that he's going to redshirt. It certainly does not sound as if that is what the program is planning to do. Greg Gard also talked about how the pace of play here in the US compared to Italy is very different. And I think we saw a little bit of that at open practice. Ricardo Greppi is still getting used to the pace of play, still getting used to the kind of conditioning that you need to play college basketball at a high major level. If it's, not just those guys, but other questions about guys like Carter Gilmore, who has at times stepped in to this program and played a backup 5 role, at times stepped in to play a backup 4 role. Now he tells me yesterday that he's been playing some minutes at the 3. Kind of just playing all over. Anywhere that he's going to be able to get minutes, he's going to do it. One of the things that I really admire about Carter Gilmore. And it all just leads me to sit back, watch, and understand that this front court, I think, is going to look more different than the back court, despite fewer sheer numbers of new faces, because I think they are just going to do different things with the rotation than we are used to. Which brings me to my next point, which is I'm not sure that a starting 5, however you want to define that, matters all that much on this team. At Big Ten Conference Media Day last week in Illinois on Thursday, Greg Gard was asked about what starting rotation was, and he said he didn't have an answer, of course. And then today, or yesterday rather, at Men's Basketball Local Media Day, he started off an opening statement again with, I don't have a starting 5 for you. What he has said is, well, they're getting a little bit away from just sheer positioning with the way that they are moving towards some of this continuity ball screen offense, some of these European concepts that assistant coach Kirk Penny, who touches on some of this in our interview at the end of the show for our premium subscribers. You can subscribe to that link in the podcast description. That's skinny6pack.substack.com. He mentions we want 2 post players and 3 ball handlers on the court, whatever that means. And it makes some sense when you evaluate the skill sets of the players in the backcourt for the Badgers. Basically, all of their guards can play either guard position. Realistically, is a point guard role John Blackwell's primary natural role? No, certainly not. And I think he is too valuable to this team as a pure go-to scorer to play a pure point guard role. Absolutely. Max Klesmit, not a primary ball handler, but he can play that role, and he can play that role pretty dang well. Then you have Cam Hunter, who was brought in as a point guard's kind of replacement for Chucky Hepburn. And you bring in Daniel Freitag, who is also a point guard. And you have Kamari McGee, who was brought in to back up Chucky Hepburn. Now, in a point guard platoon with Cam McGee and Cam Hunter and Max Klesmit and Dan Freitag. There's a lot of guys back there. And so when we're talking about having 3 guys on the court who can handle the ball, who can carry the ball up the court, and then 2 post players, it makes some sense. Not that I think a guy like John Tonje is going to do a lot of carrying the ball up the court. Not that I think if Carter Gilmore is going to get minutes at the 3, that's also going to include him carrying the ball, distributing the ball all that much. But we've seen in practice times where John Blackwell and Cameron Hunter are sharing the ball at the guard spots. And John Blackwell looks like he's dishing out the ball as a distributor at times a little bit more than Cameron Hunter is. I see it. I see the vision. I really do. When it comes to the forward spots, having two post players, I think they really want to make this work with having Steven Crowell and Nolan Winter on the court at times. Maybe that also means having two guys that can kind of play an interchangeable 4 or 5-ish role, right? With Nolan Winter playing a 5, right? But although he's playing the 4, means that you also get Xavier Ramos on the court with Nolan Winter at that time, right? If you put John Tonje and John Blackwell at the 3 and 2 spots, you're playing with an interesting lineup there. You know, you got some size with guys who can step out down low. You got some real size on the wing. You know, you're not leaving in your big center there, but ultimately what I am getting at is I think there are enough pieces where they can be really versatile. And that might make a starting 5 look different than starting 5s in years past for Greg Gard. In years past, when you look at Ken Pom and evaluate the percentage of minutes that have gone to bench players in the past, there's only 1 year in which Greg Gard eclipsed the 29% mark. Only 1 year in which bench players ate up 29% of the total available minutes on the roster. That 1 year was 2017, where they had 30.4% of minutes coming off of the bench. That's by far the most in the era by a sheer percentage. They ranked 215th in the country still in terms of rank for bench minutes percentage. There was another year, 2020, where the team ranked a little bit higher in terms of bench minutes percentage, but had fewer minutes coming off the bench overall as a sheer volume, right? But there were other teams in the country had fewer bench minutes overall themselves. So it's not that bench guys typically get a ton of minutes on average compared to other programs in the country overall between the full 365, right? I remember doing some research a while back that, you know, typically we see a bigger dip in some of these bench minutes numbers at high major programs. So some of this is to be expected. But overall, Greg Gard kind of has a set cap for the total number of folks he has coming off the bench most of the time. He usually doesn't go much more than 8 deep. And even 8 is really pushing it for that third guy off the bench in a lot of cases. But when you have even, say, a starting lineup that you maybe Sharpie in Steven Crowell, John Blackwell, and Max Klesmit, then what do? You feel real confident about Nolan Winter playing the 4 so much so that you're kind of switching his position there. And you're bringing in a transfer in Xavier Ramos that you're really excited about, who could play the 4. And you have John Tonje on the wing. Okay, does that mean that John Blackwell is playing the 2 and Max Klesmit's playing the 1? What about Cameron Hunter? What about Daniel Freitag? Where does he get his minutes? What about Kamari McGee? Where does he get his minutes and the defensive presence that he brings? Greg Gard compared Cameron Hunter and Kamari McGee as change of pace running backs today. Kamari McGee playing with a little bit of a faster pace on the floor, a little bit more tenacity to his game. That's my word, not his. Compared to Cameron Hunter. I understand that. Overall, I think with how much they have an ability to play guys at different spots, we might see a starting 5 just be a little bit different, where you have different guys coming in to spell different guys, where you have Nolan Winter coming in to spell Xavier Ramos at times, where you have Nolan Winter coming in to spell Steven Crowell at times. Maybe. Or we see, Cameron Hunter as the starter, but he's getting somewhere around 20, 25 minutes. And we're seeing a lot of minutes go to Kamari McGee and Daniel Freitag and even Max Klesmit carrying the ball. because otherwise I just don't see how all these guys that they seemingly really like get minutes. And yes, the rotation will thin out. The rotation will get cut down a little bit as the season goes along, as people come into their own and we see who hits their ceiling and who doesn't. But overall, I think the defined role of a starter might be a little more fluid this year than it has been in the past for some of these Greg Gard teams, because I think they genuinely do really like their depth. And again, injuries can change it. People actually hitting their ceiling can change it. But I think there's a real chance here that what we have seen as a starter in starter minutes, as defined in the Greg Gard era, changes just a little bit this year compared to last. Before I get to my final point of the program, I want to tell you about what's coming up this week on the show. Coming up this week, today I am headed back to Madison, talking through hockey availability. The men's hockey program has its official season opener this weekend, defeated Omaha in an exhibition out in Nebraska. Last weekend, the men's hockey program welcomes Lindenwood to Madison this weekend. The women's hockey team has a top 3 matchup. Number 1, Wisconsin versus number 3, Minnesota Duluth at LeBon in Madison. Going to be an absolute banger of a matchup. Minnesota Duluth has already swept the previous number 1 Ohio State earlier this year. So a fierce opponent coming in to Madison. I'm looking forward to talking to Coach Mark Johnson and some players about that later today. And then I'll be headed to football player interviews this afternoon, breaking down Wisconsin's matchup with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Later in the week then, we'll have Aaron Brightman from the Scarlet Faithful returning to the show. Returning guest, returning champion. Really excited to have Aaron Brightman back to talk about Rutgers and Wisconsin. We'll also welcome back Ryan Eilers to the show, breaking down the Packers and Cardinals. Of course, Ryan Eilers, a Badger fan, but also big Cardinal fan. So excited to have him on the show. Lastly, this coaching staff is willing to change. This coaching staff is willing to build a program with a forward-looking vision toward college basketball. And a lot of this comes up in my conversation with Kirk Penny for our premium subscribers that we will have at the end of the show. You can find that subscription, of course, linked in the podcast description for just $5 a month. You can also subscribe at skinny6pack.substack.com. What I took away from Greg Gard yesterday was the second interaction that I've had with him in which he emphasized that they need to find new ways to stay old. And it is something that everybody in college basketball is grappling with if they cannot hold on to their, freshman recruiting classes and develop them for 3 years. Something everybody in the country is grappling with. And Greg Gard said a few times he's, looking at experience numbers and understands that he's had some of the youngest teams in the era. And so I kind of went digging to find what I think he was talking about. And what I found was looking at Ken Palm's D1 experience rank for teams in the last 4 years, the 4 least experienced teams by D1 experience rank of the Ken Palm era, that Ken Palm has been tracking this since 2006. And I realized that this has kind of just been a word salad. So let me try to clean it up. The 4 least experienced teams in Wisconsin basketball history by D1 experience rank, according to Ken Palm, since Ken Palm started recording this stat in the 2006 season, 2005-2006. Greg Gard has had all 4 of those teams. And those teams came in 2018 when the team ranked 300th in D1 experience, by far the least experienced team by this metric since 2006 at Wisconsin. That team, of course, ranked 300th and did not make the NCAA tournament. Second least experienced by D1 experience rank, ranked 281st in the country. And that came in 2022. Third least was 250, was ranked 258th, came in 2016. So that's not really Greg Gard's fault. He didn't really build that roster, of course. Bo Ryan had stepped away in the fall of that season. And then the fourth least experience by D1 experience ranked was the 2023 season, in which the Badgers went to the NIT and reached the NIT finals, ranked 237th in the country in D1 experience. And then it's like a 50 spot drop off to 2013 when the team ranked 189th. And so two of those teams didn't make the NCAA tournament. And three of the four of them were Greg Gard built rosters. And two of those three were within the last 3 seasons. Clearly, this staff understands that what they were doing in the past to stay old is not something they can do anymore. And I think they had kind of that rude awakening when they lost AJ Storr and Chuggy Hepburn this offseason. And certainly losing Connor Sejan didn't help that fact either. But when I asked Greg Gard today about their coaching staff and some shakeups in the assistant coaching ranks, one of the first things that came out of his mouth was the changes they made were, it coincided with how the game has shifted schematically on the floor and how our recruiting has shifted to more of an emphasis on staying mature and experienced and old via the portal. You bring in a guy like Kirk Penny who has all this international experience. Of course, he's also helping revamp the offense. He went on to say, they have a couple, Stiesma, who's seen the NBA for a long time, that player development. Lance Randall, who has coached pretty much everywhere. And Greg Gard really raved about him. Between changing things up schematically and changing up this program's philosophy in recruiting, they are trying to find ways to compete and to stay old in a way that they have not in the past. And I think some of this affects the way that we are going to see this be a team that plays a higher percentage of bench minutes than we have in the past as well, where all of the transfers that they brought in are old, experienced veteran players that have seen a lot of college basketball. And that makes sense when you look at the correlation between the D1 experience rank and the bench minutes percentage as raw number and as the bench minutes percentage rank. Both of those things correlate very highly to Wisconsin's D1 experience rank over the last over the seasons in which Greg Gard has been at the helm of the Badgers basketball program. When you find the correlation coefficient between bench minutes percentage and D1 experience rank, it correlates at 0.74. When you find the correlation coefficient between bench minutes percentage rank and the D1 experience rank, the correlation is even higher at 0.8. Keeping in mind that that's on a scale of like 0 to 1. So like incredibly high correlation there. They play a longer bench. They play more bench minutes when they are older, when they can find guys who have more D1 experience. And so maybe it is a little bit different when you're bringing guys over from Europe and they don't have Division I basketball experience, so to speak, but they clearly see and understand that that's a big part of what they do. And they're willing to change. We've seen by how they've shaken up the assistant coaching ranks, seen by what they are doing in recruiting now, by how they are changing the offense. It is a different world for college basketball now. And I dig into this a lot in the interview that I get to have with Kirk Penny, which for our premium subscribers, stick around. That is at the end of the episode. And of course, if you want to subscribe to this, if you want to hear my conversation with New Zealand national team all-time leading scorer Kirk Penny, FIBA Hall of Famer Kirk Penny, you can subscribe to the premium feed. You can find it on Spotify or at scotty6pack.substack.com. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit me on the website, formerly known as Twitter, at KedrickSnumbers, or just throw something down in the comments. I'll make sure we get you hooked up. So stick around for that interview with Kirk Penny if you are a premium subscriber. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to today's Scotty Six Pack podcast. My 3 big takeaways from Wisconsin Basketball Media Days. I've been your host, Kedrick Stumbers. You can find me on the website, formerly known as Twitter, at Kedrick Stumbers. I cover the Wisconsin Badgers for Athlon Sports. You can also follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. While you're here, leave a nice review, 5 stars, kind comments. You can also watch the show on YouTube, youtube.com/@Scotty6Pack. Subscribe for free there. And until we talk to you all again very soon on Wisconsin